Michael, the great prince, is in charge of the seventh heaven, the highest, which is in Arabat. Gabriel, prince of the host, is in charge of the sixth heaven, which is in Makan. Satkael, prince of the host, is in charge of the fifth heaven, which is in Ma'an. Sahakael, prince of the host, is in charge of the fourth heaven, which is in Zebul. Baradiel, prince of the host, is in charge of the third heaven, which is in Sehakim. Barakiel, son of the host, is in charge of the second heaven, which is in Rakia. Sidriel, prince of the host, is in charge of the first heaven, which is in Wilon. Under them is Galgaliel, the prince, who is in charge of the orb of the sun, and with him are 96 angels, mighty and honored, who make the sun's orb run 365 parasangs through Rakia every day. Under them is Ophaniel, the prince, who is in charge of the globe of the moon, and with him are 88 angels, who make the moon's globe run 354,000 parasangs every night, whenever the moon stands in the east at its turning point. When does the moon stand in the east at its turning point? Answer: on the 15th day of every month. Under them is Rahatiel, the prince, who is in charge of the constellations, and with him are 72 angels, great and honored. Why is his name Rahatiel? Because he makes the constellations run 339,000 parasangs in their cycles and orbits each night, from the east to the west and from the west to the east, for the Holy One, blessed be He, made for them all, for the sun, the moon, and the constellations, attempt to move in by night from the west to the east. Under them is Kokabiel, the prince, who is in charge of all the stars, and with him are 365,000 myriads of ministering angels, great and honored, who make the stars run from city to city and from state to state and Rakia of the heavens. Above them are 72 princes of kingdoms in the height, corresponding to the 72 nations in the world. All of them are crowned with kingly crowns, clothed in regal dress, and decked with royal jewels. All of them ride on royal horses and grasp kingly scepters in their hands. Before each of them, when he travels through the Rakia, royal servants run with great honor and much pomp, just as kings travel on earth in chariots attended by horsemen and great armies, in glory, greatness, praise, acclamation, and splendor. The angels of the first heaven, when they see their prince, they dismount from their horses and fall prostrate. The prince of the first heaven, when he sees the prince of the second heaven, he removes the glorious crown from his head, and he falls prostrate. The prince of the second heaven, when he sees the prince of the third heaven, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. The prince of the third heaven, when he sees the prince of the fourth heaven, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. The prince of the fourth heaven, when he sees the prince of the fifth heaven, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. The prince of the fifth heaven, when he sees the prince of the sixth heaven, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. The prince of the sixth heaven, when he sees the prince of the seventh heaven, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. The prince of the seventh heaven, when he sees the 72 princes of kingdoms, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. The 72 princes of kingdoms, when they see the guardians of the door of the first palace, which is in Arabat, the highest heaven, they remove the kingly crowns from their heads and fall prostrate. The guardians of the door of the first palace, when they see the guardians of the door in the second palace, they remove their glorious crowns from their head and fall prostrate. The guardians of the door of the second palace, when they see the guardians of the door of the third palace, they remove their glorious crowns and fall prostrate. The guardians of the door of the third palace, when they see the guardians of the door of the fourth palace, they remove their glorious crowns and fall prostrate. The guardians of the door of the fourth palace, when they see the guardians of the door of the fifth palace, they remove their glorious crowns and fall prostrate. The guardians of the door of the fifth palace, when they see the guardians of the door of the sixth palace, they remove their glorious crowns and fall prostrate. The guardians of the door of the sixth palace, when they see the guardians of the door of the seventh palace, they remove their glorious crowns and fall prostrate. The guardians of the door of the seventh palace, when they see the four great and honored princes who are in charge of the four camps of the Shekinah, they remove their glorious crowns and fall prostrate. The four great princes, when they see Tagas, the prince, great and honored, in song and praise at the head of all the celestials, they remove the glorious crowns from their heads and fall prostrate. Tagas, the great and honored prince, when he sees Baratiel, the great prince, upon the tops of whose fingers Arabat is spread out, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Baratiel, the great prince, when he sees Haman, the great, terrible, honored, beautiful, and dreaded prince, who makes all the denizens and heights quake when the time comes to recite Kedusa, as it is written, at the voice of Haman the people flee, when you arise the nations scatter. He removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Haman, the great prince, when he sees Tadratsiel, Yahweh, the great prince, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Tadratsiel, Yahweh, the great prince, when he sees Atrugiel, Yahweh, the great prince, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Artrugiel, Yahweh, the great prince, when he sees Narariel, Yahweh, the great prince, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Naaririel, Yahweh, the great prince, when he sees Sasnagiel, Yahweh, the great prince, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Sansnigiel, Yahweh, the prince, when he sees Zariel, Yahweh, the great prince, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Zazrael, Yahweh, the prince, when he sees Gabutrariel, Yahweh, the prince, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Gaburatriel, Yahweh, the prince, when he sees Arapiel, Yahweh, the prince, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Arapiel, Yahweh, the prince, when he sees Azroilu, Yahweh, the prince, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Azrielu, Yahweh, the prince, the head of every session of the heavenly academy, when he sees Galisur, Yahweh, the prince, who reveals all the secrets of Torah, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Galisur, Yahweh, the prince, when he sees Zachiel, Yahweh, the prince, who was appointed to record the merits of Israel upon the throne of glory, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Zachiel, Yahweh, the great prince, when he sees Anapiel, Yahweh, the prince, who keeps the keys of the palace of the heaven of Arabat, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Why is his name called Anapiel? Because the bow of his majesty, glory, crown, brilliance, and splendor overshadows all the chambers of Arabat, the highest heaven, like the glory of the Creator of the world. As it is written, the Creator of the world, his majesty veils the heavens, and the earth is filled with his glory. So does the majesty and glory of Anapiel, Yahweh, the prince, overshadow all the chambers of highest Arabat. Anapiel, Yahweh, the prince, when he sees Soterasiel, Yahweh, the great, terrible, and honored prince, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Why is his name called Soterasiel? Because he is appointed to serve in the divine presence over the four heads of the river of fire, opposite the throne of glory, and that any prince who wishes to leave or to enter the presence of the Shekinah may do so only by his permission, because the seals of the four heads of the river of fire are entrusted to his keeping. Further, he is called Soterasiel because his height is 70,000 myriads of parasangs, and he stirs up the fire of the river of fire, and he leaves and enters the presence of the Shekinah to explain the records concerning the inhabitants of the earth, as it is written, a court was held and the books were opened. Soterasiel, Yahweh, the prince, when he sees Sokedosi, Yahweh, the great, mighty, terrible, and honored prince, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Why is his name called Sokedosi? Because he weighs men's merits in scales in the presence of the Holy One. Blessed be he. Sokedosi, Yahweh, the prince, when he sees Zehanpuriu, Yahweh, the prince, great, mighty, honored, glorified, and dreaded in the whole heavenly household, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Why is his name called Zehanpuriu? Because he is angry at the river of fire and quenches it in its place. Zehanpuriu, Yahweh, the prince, when he sees Azboga, Yahweh, the prince, great, mighty, terrible, honored, glorified, wonderful, beloved, and dreaded among the princes who know the secrets of the throne of glory, he removes the glorious crown from his head and falls prostrate. Why is his name called Azboga? Because he girds men with the garments of life, and in time to come he will wrap the righteous and pious of the world in robes of life, so that clad in them they may enjoy eternal life.